Buongiorno. Bentornati. Welcome back. Last time we studied nouns, adjectives, and definite and indefinite articles, and we discussed the southernmost island and region of Italy, Sicily, or as you now know it, Sicilia. Now we will zoom up north to examine the region of Lombardy, La Lombardia. Please read along with me in Italian and remember that you can find a translation in the course workbook if you need one. Oggi parliamo della Lombardia. La Lombardia è una regione nella parte nord-ovest dell'Italia. Si trova al confine con la nazione della Svizzera al nord, il Piemonte all'ovest, il Veneto all'est, il Trentino Alto Adige all'est e l'Emilia-Romagna a sud. La Lombardia è la regione più popolata di tutta l'Italia. Ci sono più persone che abitano in questa regione che in qualsiasi altra regione italiana. Ci sono tante università in questa regione e tante tradizioni culinarie. La polenta, per esempio. La Lombardia è una regione con una lunga storia industriale. Did you get some of it? Bravi! Did you recognize nouns, definite and indefinite articles, adjectives, and even ci sono? The nouns are regione, parte, confine, nazione, persone, università, tradizioni, polenta, storia, and industrie. Many of them end in E, so we will need to figure out their gender. If you guessed feminine for most of them, then you guessed correctly. Only confine is masculine. How could you tell? Well, you recall that singular nouns that either end in E or in A can be masculine or feminine. But you could tell from the definite and indefinite articles that most of these nouns were feminine. Una or la regione, la polenta, una storia. On the other hand, when you saw al confine and not alla confine, maybe you suspected that it couldn't be feminine. Well, this would be very sophisticated of you, considering that we have not yet gone over al or alla yet. Those are combined prepositions, by the way, and we'll get to them later on. But for now, if you based a guess on the thought that the alla looked like la, you were right. Learning another language is often about trusting your instinct. At the same time, this showed you the importance of learning nouns with their definite articles as much as possible. Maybe you also used adjectives to figure out gender and number here. La regione più popolata, the most populated region. Or tante università in questa regione e tante tradizioni culinarie. Many universities in this region and many culinary traditions. Here, the E ending of tante told you that università was plural, since nouns ending in accented vowels can be either singular or plural. Tradizioni ends in I, which is a plural ending for either masculine or feminine nouns, but the tante and culinarie tell you that it is feminine. You may recall the nouns ending in zione are usually feminine. Bravi. We will come back to more linguistic aspects of this passage in a moment. First, a few basics about the Lombardy region. With over 10 million residents, Lombardy has as many people as Portugal, more than Austria or Switzerland, and twice as many as Norway. This is due mainly to the arrival of immigrants, who compose about 10% of the regional population. Lombardy contains the province of Milan, which is the capital, or capoluogo, of the region, as well as those of Brescia, Bergamo, Monza, Como, and many others. It leads Italy economically, with a range of companies in the private and public sectors, such as agriculture, mechanics, textiles, pharmaceutics, and publishing. When we talk about Lombardy, we may think of the many sights to be found in its cities: the Duomo of Milano, the Pinacoteca di Brera, the Foro Romano in Brescia, and so forth. You may think of Leonardo da Vinci's painting, The Last Supper, L'Ultima Cena, which is housed in the Church of Santa Maria delle Grazie in Milan. There are many places to visit in this region. And speaking of things to see and do, today we'll learn how to speak about everyday life, activities, and work, as we learn the present tense of first conjugation verbs, the ones that end in are, are. Oggi parliamo delle attività quotidiane. Italian is a verb-heavy language. If you understand verbs, then you can communicate effectively and efficiently even with the limited vocabulary of a beginner. Let's turn back to our opening text. What are these words that are in bold? La Lombardia si trova al confine con la nazione della Svizzera, il Piemonte, il Veneto, il Trentino Alto Adige e l'Emilia-Romagna. La Lombardia è la regione più popolata di tutta l'Italia. Ci sono più persone che abitano in questa regione che in qualsiasi altra regione italiana. You remember è and sono? These are forms of the verb essere, the verb that means to be. Lombardy is located, literally finds itself, as si trova means here, on the border with Switzerland. Abitano is the verb in there are more people who live or reside in this region. Ci sono più persone che abitano in questa regione. If you can identify the verbs, then you can unlock the meaning behind most sentences. Verbs in Italian, as in many Romance languages, are conjugated according to person and number. They belong to 3 different conjugations, groupings that are based on their endings. First conjugation, the verbs that end in are. Second conjugation, the verbs that end in ere, E-R-E. And third conjugation, the verbs that end in ire, I-R-E. Verbs are also conjugated according to tense or time, past, present, or future, and something called mood, indicative, conditional, imperative, or subjunctive. In this course, we will start off with the present tense of the indicative mood for the first conjugation. This is how we say that someone is doing something. A quick example is the verb mangiare, to eat. If we conjugate it into the first person singular form, mangio, we are saying, I eat or I am eating. Remember that the present tense has both meanings in Italian. Let's read aloud a nice list of some first conjugation verbs. Please read with me. Abitare, to live or to reside. Amare, to love. Arrivare, to arrive. Ascoltare, to listen to. Aspettare, to wait for. ballare, to dance, cantare, to sing, cercare, to look for, cominciare, to begin, comprare, to buy, desiderare, to desire, dimenticare, to forget, guardare, to look at, imparare, to learn, incontrare, to meet, insegnare, to teach, lavorare, to work, parlare, to speak, pensare, to think, mangiare, to eat, ricordare, to remember, trovare, to find, and tornare, to return. How do you memorize all of this vocabulary? In this course, you have your handy workbook filled with exercises to help you practice. Language practice is like muscle memory. The more you repeat it, the more your body and mind will remember it. Another way to remember new vocabulary is to see similarities with related words in another language. Here are a few helpful hints. Abitare looks like habitat, and it means to live or to reside. Who doesn't know what amore means? That shares the same root as amare. Shuffle a few letters around, and aspettare could remind you of expectation, and it means to wait for. A strategy here to remember is to substitute double T's with CT in English, and you will get closer to its definition in that language. The verb cominciare looks like commence, right? Desiderare looks like desire. At least the first part of the infinitive does. Dimenticare, to be outside, di, of your mind, mente, or to forget, as this verb means. Incontrare, to encounter. Lavorare, a bit of a stretch here visually, but it resembles labor. Parlare reminds you of parler, correct? Pensare is like pensive. Ricordare resembles record. And tornare looks a lot like return, which is its meaning. The absolute best way to remember words is to have literal and visual context for them. So let's go back to our two verbs here from the opening text, trova and abitano, or trovare and abitare in their infinitive or non-conjugated forms. Conjugating verbs is relatively simple. Remove the last three letters from the infinitive form, the are, ere, or ire, and then add the correct endings. These endings will change depending upon subject, number, tense, and mood. You probably remember the subject pronouns from our first lesson when we learned the verbs which mean to be, essere and stare, and the verb to have, avere. In the singular, these are io, tu, lei, lui, and lei, formal. And in the plural, these are noi, voi, and loro. These subjects are built into each conjugated form, so you will only need to repeat them for emphasis or to draw a distinction. Saying, for example, sei, S-E-I, from the verb essere means you are in just one word. No need to say tu unless you'd like to give it emphasis or you need to be extremely clear. There are similarities in the present indicative that all verbs share, no matter what the conjugation. For the present tense of the indicative mood, the first person singular, io, always ends in o. The second person singular, tu, always ends in I. The first person plural, noi, always ends in iamo. The second person plural voi always ends in te, te. And the third person plural loro always ends in no. So when you look at charts of essere and stare, and then the conjugations of abitare and trovare, you will notice these similarities. Again, you can rely upon this pattern for all verbs in the present indicative. Repeat the conjugations of trovare and abitare after me, please. Trovo, trovi, trova, troviamo, trovate, trovano. Abito, abiti, abita. Abitiamo, abitate, abitano. I will let you in on a secret. First conjugation regular verbs are easy. Why? All you need to remember is this. The shared final endings we just reviewed, o, I, iamo, te, and no, and then one vowel, a, a. Here's my trick for remembering these forms. Since it is the first conjugation, you will use one vowel 3 times. A appears in the lui, lei, voi, and loro forms. Trova, trovate, trovano. Let's repeat all of these forms one more time. Trova, trovate, trovano. Remember that this form means I find, I am finding, you find, you are finding, or for abitare, I reside, I am residing, and so forth. So it means both what you do and what you are doing in the present. Bravi! Okay, now that we've gotten that down, let's put this into context. I'll discuss a day in my life, perhaps also a typical day in yours. Prima mangio, pratico yoga, lavoro, insegno o faccio ricerca. Pranzo, continuo a lavorare, torno a casa, preparo la cena, mangio, parlo con la mia famiglia, guardo la TV e vado a letto. Do you hear all of the O's in this short passage? Short verbs that end in O are generally a hint that they are all in the first person instead of the third person plural, which ends in ano. These are very simple sentences, almost only one word in some cases, but they are all complete sentences. So let's translate. First, I eat, I practice yoga, I work, I teach, or I do research. I eat lunch. I continue to work. I return home. I prepare dinner. I eat dinner. I speak with my family. I watch TV. I go to bed. All of this seems clear enough, right? Yet there are a few unique patterns even for the regular ARE verbs. One regards verbs that end in giare or ciare, like mangiare. In the case of these verbs, you don't add an additional I in the tu and noi forms. Mangio, mangi, mangia. Mangiamo, mangiate, mangiano. Comincio, cominci, comincia. Cominciamo, cominciate, and cominciano. A second exception concerns verbs that end in gare and care, like spiegare, to explain, dimenticare, to forget, or cercare, to look for. These verbs add an H to the tu and noi forms. Tu spieghi, noi spieghiamo. Tu cerchi, noi cerchiamo. In this way, we keep the hard sound of the C or the G from the infinitive form. Spiegare, cercare. Remember, one of the golden rules of Italian pronunciation is that a C or a G in front of an I or an E is soft. Ciao or gesso, the word for chalk. But in H makes it a hard sound, spieghi or cerchi. Let's use these verbs to talk about a classic film by Ermanno Olmi called Il Posto, the job. Posto can also mean place, but here it is, job. This film is set in the industrial Milan of the late 1950s and early 1960s. As I read this text, please pay attention to the verbs and read along with me if you like. Questo film parla di un ragazzo che si chiama Domenico. Domenico è un ragazzo giovane. Non frequenta più la scuola perché la sua famiglia ha bisogno di soldi. Domenico cerca un lavoro a Milano. Trova un posto in un'azienda grande. All'azienda incontra Antonietta, una ragazza giovane e bella. Ad una festa dell'azienda Domenico balla. Just focusing on the verbs, you can get the gist of the passage, right? Parla, è, frequenta, ha bisogno, cerca, trova, incontra, balla. Let's translate just these verbs and then tackle the rest. The film speaks about. Domenico is. Domenico does not attend. His family needs. Domenico looks for. Domenico finds. Domenico meets. Domenico dances. By the way, avere bisogno means to need, but we will study the idiomatic expressions with avere next time. If you didn't understand the rest of the paragraph, you could still get that Domenico is searching for something, which you know from the title is a job. You could infer that Domenico no longer attends school because his family needs money. You can also infer that Domenico looks for and finds a job, and even that he meets someone and dances. Does he dance with her? You'll have to watch the film to find out. If you had to learn one new word from this paragraph, it would be azienda, company, given that it appears with more frequency. Be strategic about learning unknown vocabulary. Do not try to understand every word. And I recommend that you watch as many Italian movies and TV shows as possible, even with subtitles, as it will build your listening comprehension. Are all first conjugation verbs regular? No. Remember what I just said about being strategic with new words? You have to adopt the same practice when it comes to new verbs, especially the irregular ones. Since this is most likely your first time studying Italian, we will limit our irregular verbs that end in are to just 4 basic verbs. Andare, to go, fare, to do or to make, dare, to give, and one you already know, stare, to be. Fare is arguably the most important verb in the entire Italian language. Let's take a look at their conjugations. Please repeat after me. The verb andare, vado, vai, va, andiamo, andate, vanno. The verb stare, sto, stai, sta, stiamo, state, stanno. The verb fare, faccio, fai, fa, facciamo, fate, fanno. The verb dare, do, dai, da, diamo, date, danno. Bravi, good job. As you see, even these irregular verbs follow the same ending patterns we discussed earlier. With irregular verbs, there is an additional pattern you can memorize. Many irregular verbs have the same stem in the noi and voi form as we see in andare, which goes back to the and stem of the infinitive. However, fare has the same form in the io and noi forms, which is another pattern in the irregular verbs. Fac goes back to the Latinate infinitive of the verb, to do, facere from Latin. Let's practice this by modifying the description of my daily routine, which contain forms of fare and andare. Please read this with me and modify it as I read it to describe your own routine if you like. Prima faccio colazione. Faccio yoga o faccio corsa. Vado a lavorare. Insegno o faccio ricerca. Mangio. Continuo a lavorare o studiare. Vado a casa. Preparo la cena. Mangio. Parlo con la mia famiglia. Guardo la TV. Vado a letto. And now let's elaborate the plot description from Il Posto. Questo film parla di un ragazzo che si chiama Domenico. Domenico è un ragazzo giovane. Non frequenta più la scuola perché la sua famiglia ha bisogno di soldi. Lui va a Milano per cercare lavoro. Dà tanti esami per avere il posto. Trova un posto in un'azienda grande. All'azienda incontra Antonietta, una ragazza giovane e bella. Domenico e Antonietta vanno a tanti posti insieme. Ad una festa dell'azienda, Domenico balla. Now you have a little more information about the plot, but not enough to spoil it. Yes, Domenico goes to Milan from his small town to find employment. In order to get the job, he undergoes lots of written, physical, and psychological exams. Dare un esame means to take a test. He and Antonietta go to many places in town together. So irregular verbs may be more time-consuming to memorize, but without them, as you can see, there is a lot you can't express. Let's finish our lesson today by turning back to one of the artistic gems to be found in this region, Leonardo da Vinci's painting The Last Supper, L'Ultima Cena, or Il Cenacolo, as it's called. This, as we learned earlier, is housed in the church of Santa Maria delle Grazie in Milan. There is so much happening in this famous painting that we are now able to describe. For this activity, let's briefly review our numbers up to 20. Please read with me. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. Okay, I will ask you questions about the painting, giving you a chance to answer, and then I will provide you with sample answers afterwards. Please read with me. Quante persone ci sono? How many people are there? Ci sono 13 persone. Mangiano? No, non mangiano. Parlano? Sì, molti di loro parlano. Che fanno? Parlano e non mangiano. Che portano? What do they wear? Portano i vestiti con molti colori, azzurro, rosa e marrone. Come sono? hanno i capelli lunghi. Alcuni sono sereni. Altri sono preoccupati. Did you follow all that? If you couldn't understand it, all of it, don't worry, you're learning. I hope that you have enjoyed our first taste of Lombardia. We will return to this fascinating region. Next stop, il Lazio. Ci vediamo presto. Alla prossima!